All right, welcome to part 2. So Renaissance art. We're actually going to look specifically at the Italian Renaissance today. And to do that, got to kind of back up a bit because I realized that we didn't define this term. I just sort of mentioned it. Fresco is one of the things that will be on your list. Hopefully you've got access to your works to know list. You've got it printed out or you've got it in front of you. So fresco literally means fresh, a method of painting in which pigments are applied to a thin layer of wet plaster so that they'll be absorbed and the painting becomes part of the wall. Yeah, so that's kind of what we talked about yesterday, the fact that the paint then mixes in with the plaster and you end up with colored plaster. So this is the picture of Giotto and his fresco. The advantage of this is if you do it right, it lasts for a very, very long time. They found frescoes that have been in churches that are ruined and buried, and they uncover them and the frescoes are still there. Our first person today is actually more of an architect, and his name is Brunelleschi. And I think there's supposed to be 2 L's in there. So he is the one who designed the dome of the cathedral in Florence. So looking at this cathedral, a little bit of review from yesterday. What type of structure is this? What period of art does this cathedral come from? Anyone speak out?
Mr. Olson.
Yep.
It's not Brunelleschi, it's Brunelleschi.
Okay, I'm glad. I'm gonna totally murder a lot of Italian.
No, please no.
Geometric, no. Hellenistic.
So it's a bit
Mr. Olson, Abio wants you to let her in.
I'm trying here. So
Okay.
you'll notice this is the rounded arches, little windows. This is Romanesque. So you've only got a few windows. There's no flying buttresses coming off of it. This is a fairly old building. If you ever get a chance to go to Florence, not only do they have good ice cream and you can get stomach sandwiches, but they've got great art. And this cathedral is amazing. But this dome is the first one that was done since basically Roman times and on a huge scale. And so I'm going to give it a try here, Gwen. Brunelleschi is an architect who figured out how it is that he can manage to support all of these bricks in a way that won't collapse. This gives you an idea of just how big it actually is. And here is how it was done. You can actually take tours of the inside of it. So for this class, we're not going to go too much into the details, but notice basically runs inside the dome. Then you have a lantern that was put up on the top of it. And this was a major advance at the beginning of the Renaissance. Florence was one of the wealthiest cities in Europe at that point, and which is a lot of the reason why today our artwork is going to kind of center around Florence. So a little review. This was a Northern Renaissance piece. He's trying to get perspective right. He knows something should be happening, but the guy doesn't understand the art, the math. And so we began talking about this one. Hopefully you've seen the video on Masaccio. And this was one of the very first pieces that mathematically applied perspective. And so when you are standing in the right place in this church, you look up, it looks three-dimensional. You can actually tell, yeah, this guy is standing behind this guy. This lady is a step in front of this person. It doesn't come out overly well, unfortunately, on a PowerPoint. So here's your eye. And here are the lines that are going to the various parts of the painting. Obviously, this is just flat, but you get the idea that this little skeleton is in front of that one, etc. And we call this linear perspective. Often when people talk about, oh, you've got to put perspective in your drawing or painting, this is what you're thinking of. It's a type of perspective used by artists in which the relative size, shape, and position of objects are determined by drawn or imagined lines converging at a point on the horizon. And you'll often see this like examples of railroad lines that tend to converge as they go the different distance, or you just know that a person farther away from you is going to be smaller than a person close to you. This is what we call the vanishing point. So here is a Renaissance painting, and the lines that are running in front of you should be parallel.
Mr. Olson,
Yes.
can you let Darren in?
The lines that are running away from you should not be parallel. So this person understood that this line here should not be parallel to this line here, and you can see that they do disappear into a vanishing point. And when you take drawing and painting, you'll learn about 1-point perspective and 2-point perspective and all that sort of thing. We're not going to worry about that too much in this class, but you can see here this person understood the idea of a vanishing point. You should have your lines behaving properly like they do in the real world. So this one, if you are watching this and you are not in the live class, pause the video, take out a ruler, and find the vanishing point. If you are in the live, okay, we'll take a pause here while they do that. So if you are in the live video, you just have to take my word for it. There isn't any. The lines go all willy-nilly everywhere. So here's one that I went through and looked at the various vanishing points, and there is none. It is just simply kind of like what a grade schooler would draw. They say, yep, I'm just going to draw a picture of a house. And there is no specific place where the lines lead to. Okay, Giotto, one of my absolute favorites, but he still didn't get it right. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. These lines here are parallel, and they shouldn't be. Same with these lines here. So he understood the concept, but didn't understand the math. Here's another one of his. So he knew from experience that these lines here should converge, but you notice he didn't quite get the math right. Same with the steps here on the floor. Okay, by the time of the Renaissance was fully in bloom, the math was right. This is often used as one of your kind of key examples that if you draw the lines, and this is a really bad, the lines that go on here, and all these beams in the ceiling, etc., they will all converge. The lines of the table, everything. Leonardo da Vinci knew and used this idea of the vanishing point to bring the focus of attention to the center of Christ. Here's another one by Raphael we'll talk about. And again, the vanishing point is right in the middle, the point where he wants you to focus your attention. So another form of perspective that came about during this time is what we call foreshortening. And this is not a picture of a dwarf. Okay, this is a picture of a full-sized, 6-foot person, supposedly. But this is the experience that you get. We know this if you just are walking along the park and you happen to see someone laying there, that it's going to look like they have been shortened when the person is laying down. Definition of foreshortening. Drawing pictures, Darren's still not in here. Okay, drawing pictures or objects according to the rules of perspective so they appear to recede or protrude in the three-dimensional space. And here's a very simple photographic illustration that, yeah, we know this guy is actually not that tall, our mind automatically is just laying down. All right, important piece. This is probably the first use of foreshortening. This one happens to be in the National Gallery. Next time you guys are in London, I expect you should probably spend, probably a half day at the National Gallery and spend a whole day at the British Museum. But notice the foreshortening. We have a rather unrealistically laid out set down here where you have all of these weapons and such, but notice this guy here is actually foreshortened. You have all of these spears and such. It's like someone laid them out on the ground. They're not the jumble they would be, but they do follow close to rules of perspective. And so this is one of the famous figures in the history of art, that this foreshortened character. And there's 2 other panels of this in Paris and Florence, but the one in London is the one with the foreshortened character.
Mr. Olson.
And there's the one in Paris. We're going to look at is called atmospheric perspective. And this one is where you basically use the different shades of color to make it look like the atmosphere, or to make it look like different distance. And we're still having trouble getting some people to join here. Okay, so here's a good example that we see this every day. You look up at the hills, and as they get further away, they change in shade. Here's a painting that makes use of it. So you have here this middle row, and you have a back row, and this looks different than this one. Okay, so these are photographs. You have a painting. And this is one of the first paintings to actually make use of the atmospheric perspective. And so you have, this is where basically the parable where Jesus is out of money, and Peter says, what are we going to do to pay this tax? And Jesus says, go catch a fish, take the coin out of the fish's mouth. And so here you have Peter asking, Peter fishing, Peter paying the tribute. But the important thing here for our purpose is looking at the background. This hill, this range of hills, this hill, and these all have different levels of atmospheric perspective. And this again is Masaccio, our famous perspective guy. In addition, the vanishing point in this, again, is right behind Christ's head. And so he's used not only the atmospheric perspective, but he's also using linear perspective. This guy has mastered it. Now we can move on to the Renaissance in full. So just a little interesting thing, often in the Renaissance, people would put their own portraits in, and this is a self-portrait of Masaccio as one of these disciples. So he's this guy right here. So just to remind you, if they have the bright purple background, these are ones that you guys will need to know. There will be a Quizlet up sometime later today, so you can practice on these pieces as well. All right, another important one. Yes, question.
I think some people are still in the waiting room.
Nope, everybody should be in, I think.
Oh, okay, never mind.
We finally got Darren. It took a while to manage to get him to come in. So this is again in Florence, in the same group that the dome is on. There is a small building called a baptistry. Actually, it's a pretty big baptistry, which was originally just a separate building where then babies would go to get baptized. And on the doors of this baptistry, there was a competition. And this competition was who can draw, or who can, I guess you should say, sculpt figures for the next set of doors. It's kind of interesting this time as we're experiencing all these online things and such, that Florence had just been saved from this big epidemic that was going around. And they wanted to have these doors as an offering of thanks of the fact that Florence wasn't taken in this epidemic that had been going around. And so they got all the big names to submit a work of art and say, we're going to judge who is the best. And they submitted them. They said the topic will be Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, or when Abraham tried to sacrifice Isaac. And the top two came down to Brunelleschi and Ghiberti. And Brunelleschi sort of did the traditional form of it. It's basically in layers. So you have this one here, the servants. You have here, you have Abraham and Isaac. You have the altar. Here you have the angel coming in. And the judges said, that's pretty good. And then this was Ghiberti. He was in his early 20s, just a young buck coming in. And he had this radically different way of constructing it. It's actually in a pyramid shape. And so here you have the donkey and the servant. You have Isaac, you have Abraham with his knife, and you have this more dramatic action. You have coming up to the point, down through the knife, going to go into Isaac. But look, the angel is intervening in to stop. And they said, wow, that's really good too. But Brunelleschi, he's like a famous person. We'll give him a tie. And actually, Brunelleschi was so offended that he tied with this young guy that he said, nope, I'm leaving. I'm going to go off to Rome to study. And so Ghiberti took it over, and the rest, as they say, is history, which is why you're learning about this in this class. So the south doors consist of 28 panels, and they're basically life of Christ from New Testament. So these show the 4 gospel writers, and these show 4 church fathers. And the rest of these are scenes from the life of Christ. And so here's some examples of them. They're fairly basic, partly because they're fairly small. You had to fit 28 of them according to the commission. Now, when I say small, I mean, here are people sitting on the edge of it. And interestingly enough, these were actually out on the doors of the baptistry, exposed to the weather and everything, until 1990. And that's when the church in Florence decided, oh, maybe these works of art should actually be put indoors. So what you see today are actually copies, and you have to go into the little museum next door to see the originals. And then the people of Florence liked this so much, they said to Ghiberti, would you be willing to do something even grander for the next set of doors on the same building? And he said, okay, but can I make them bigger? And so here you have 10 panels, 10 large panels that basically tell Old Testament stories. And later on, when Michelangelo saw these, he was so impressed, he said, wow, these doors could be the doors of heaven. They could be the gates of paradise. And so today, these are called the gates of paradise. So in terms of what you guys need to know, just simply know that they're the doors of the baptistry in Florence. Or you could call them the gates of paradise, which specifically refers to these ones. So here are some of the bronze castings, the sculptures that Ghiberti made. And the interesting thing to look at here, and especially if you can go see these in real life, is that you have all these varying levels of relief. So from here in the Garden of Eden, you have very low relief, almost like a drawing. You have these angels, and then as they come down, the angels get a little coming out Okay, this is actually creation. Till this angel's wing sticks out. You go along here and you actually have figures almost in full relief. They're almost three-dimensional. And so this is basically the story of the creation, the fall, getting kicked out of the garden. But notice how they fade from the background, coming down into real life, and the motion that Ghiberti put into this. So this is again, Cain and Abel, going from low relief. Here's Adam and Eve in their little hut, down into the full relief here. Okay, this is, this thing here, okay, obviously says Noah, kind of gives away the answer. This is what Ghiberti figured the ark looked like a pyramid. So this is actually the ark, and all the people coming out of the ark, Noah getting drunk, having to be covered by his sons. This was his actual version of Abraham. The previous one was just his trial. He did this actually many years later, but still kept the same pyramid structure. Jacob and Esau. And notice that he's using Romanesque architecture. In the ones that show architectural buildings, they are Romanesque. Okay, here's the story of Joseph. So you've got him, them bring him out of the well. So up here, his brothers have put him in the well. Okay, storing grain in the middle. Okay, on here it's the silver cup story. So he fits the whole story of Joseph into here. Okay, Moses, 10 Commandments, crossing the Red Sea. Joshua and the armies of Israel, Jericho. Just basically drawn in, coming down to, you have full sculptures in front. Battles of David. Now this one is Solomon meeting the Queen of Sheba. And suddenly now we have Gothic architecture. We have the ribbed vaults, have the pointed arches. And Solomon, as you hopefully know, was considered the wisest man in the world. And so what Ghiberti is showing here is that, yeah, now we have a modern picture. We have none of this old-fashioned stuff. Like here, this Romanesque where it was heavy and dark and medieval. No, now we've got the light. We have the church reflecting the wisdom of Solomon. And so he specifically put in this Gothic architecture, in this case, to show how Solomon was sort of the epitome of wisdom and to remind you that the church should reflect that. All right. Another important person at this time was Donatello. And bring this one up through the use of his contrapposto. And this was a bronze sculpture. This one is in Florence as well. And this is his version of the David. And you can see how when we talk about Renaissance, they are looking back to the rebirth of knowledge. To them, they said Greece and Rome, that's where it was at. And so they are going back and they're looking at these Roman copies of Greek sculptures and stuff the Romans did themselves and trying to get back into that. Now, one of these important museums that maybe on your senior trip, if you get a chance, I would strongly suggest you check this one out, is called the Uffizi, and I hope that's right. Originally built as an office building, and Uffizi means offices, and now it's a museum, one of the best museums in the world. And it's full of paintings like this one. So this one is by one of my absolute favorite artists, a guy named Botticelli. And what I would like to point out on this one, this is the Annunciation. which is something you see a lot in art. This is where the angel is telling Mary, you're going to have a baby. So this is the angel. And he's got a lily, which stands for purity. And in the background, in this window now, with atmospheric perspective here, you have linear perspective, you have a contemporary scene. This is what a person in 1489 would have seen traveling around Tuscany. And notice also as well, this guy's veil. So one of the things that Botticelli is doing here is he's kind of showing off a little bit. He's saying, look at that. I can paint something that you can't even see. I'm going to paint this veil on these guys just to show that I can do it. And here's another Botticelli. And this is when the three wise men came and visited. And a few interesting things about here that, of course, being a thoroughly modern 15th century Italian, I know that Jesus was not born in 15th century Italy. Okay, I did this one here because, I want people to be able to identify it, but this is a historical painting. I want to show it like it was when Jesus was born. And since I know that the stuff from the time of Jesus is ruins, I will say that Jesus was born in some ruins. And so you basically have Jesus being born in Roman ruins. You have these Roman ruins in the background. And the people that he painted, so in particular, this fellow here, and this fellow here are important people in the town. This one here and this one here are the two that paid for the painting. And so, of course, when you are a patron and you say, oh yeah, I'm going to come in and I'm going to pay for this painting to happen on the condition that you make me one of the wise men. Because every time I want to see that in my palace, I want to say, yeah, I'm pretty wise. So these are two guys that painted it. These other people are all important people in the town of Florence. And Botticelli is like, yeah, if I make this guy a wise man, maybe then he will eventually want to hire me to give him a painting. So in this way, it's actually sort of a form of advertising, form of like, hey, I could make you have the face of Joseph if you want. And of course, so we all know who it is. He painted himself. This is a self-portrait of Botticelli looking out at you, saying, yep, this is me. Here's my card. You know how to get a hold of me. All right. One that you need to know. Again by Botticelli. So this is entitled Spring. And here you have the goddess Venus. And here you have the goddess Flora. And the story in here is that there was this lady who was captured by, I believe this was a dryad, some sort of minor god, and she was changed then into the goddess of the plants. And you can see here the plants growing out of her mouth as she changes into this person. And then over here you have others that are celebrating the fact that spring is here. And this lady here, actually the model, appears in a lot of Botticelli's paintings. Most famously, in the next one that you guys need to know, the birth of Venus. Okay, her face is even on the Italian coin today. So this is where this one is copied from. This is a story that Venus was born on a seashell floating out of the ocean. And here you have other accompanying figures from mythology come out for our full long Greek or art history class. And we will go into more details. But these are two of Botticelli's most famous works, and they are in the Uffizi. Okay, another one. If you have a euro and it is Italian, you have probably seen this one. This is called the Vitruvian Man. And this is actually in Venice. And this was done by Leonardo da Vinci. Often you just call him Leonardo. And the idea is that a person has all of these dimensions that they will fit equally inside a circle. And so Leonardo was very concerned with making sure that everything was accurate when he did his paintings. he would go and dissect corpses, so he knew how the muscle structure. So if he's going to build an arm, he will make sure that the muscle structure in the arm is correct. And so this is based on a theorem by a guy named Vitruvius, which isn't exactly accurate. It's close enough. People are variable. But this Vitruvian man is Leonardo's sketch of, and he just did this for his own notes. That was never meant to be a public work of art. Saying, yep, this is how you can make your artwork to look realistic and to have the right proportions. Okay, you may have heard of this one. This one's actually in Milan, so it's a little closer to us, but it's hard to get into because it's in a small room. This was actually made in the dining room of a monastery, and Leonardo used a new and experimental form of fresco, which unfortunately, even during his own lifetime, started to fall apart. And over the last, what are we looking at, 500 years, so many people have gone back and tried to fix it up and glue bits on that it's really in bad shape. In fact, the monks even just decided to go and carve a doorway through it at one point. But famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci, and it is wonderfully laid out. You have these groups of three disciples here, three here, three here, three here, and this is the moment right after where Jesus says, one of you will betray me. Yes.
Emma says if you could let her in.
I am not seeing her. Yeah, so to answer Gwen's question, reason they have smooth faces is because a lot of their face is actually gone. It's flaked off, and yeah. So this is one of those things that if you happen to be in Milan and you don't have much to do, you could go there, but it's not as impressive as some other things. Whoops, skipped one. All right, this one is pretty cool. And I'm just gonna touch on this. This is a different type of art. This is called a tapestry. And this is a series of tapestries in Paris where you can actually go into this museum, and they actually have some unicorn horns that you can look at. And I think you can even touch them if I remember right. But this is a series of tapestries done about a unicorn. And there's some interesting stories and theories behind what these all mean. But the difference between a tapestry and the Bayeux so-called tapestry, which we looked at before, the Bayeux tapestry is just an embroidery. It's like if someone does cross stitch, you take a piece of cloth and then you take some thread or some yarn and you make a figure on the cloth. These are actually woven into the fabric by changing which line of thread happens to be at the top. So this is by a far more complicated process. And to be able to make this sort of detail in this sort of size is quite impressive, especially for someone that I would probably not even be able to make a sock. So this one is a pretty affordable museum. It's in Paris. It's cheap. There's often no lines. Go check out the unicorns and look at their collection of unicorn horns. All right, another definition. A pieta. And Gwyn, what does pieta mean? Actually, not there. Related to the English word pity. But it's a work that shows Mary holding the body of Christ. And the most famous pieta is by Michelangelo. So we've now hit 2 of the turtles. And this one is in St. Peter's in the Vatican. You guys will go there for senior trip. There's so much to see there. I'm not sure if you'll actually get to see this one, but give it a try. And notice in the carving, we think back to those old Roman copies of the Greek ones. Think of the Hellenistic art. They have gone so beyond the detail that they had in the Hellenistic time. This is carved out of solid marble. You have all of these bits of drapery and cloth that he simply carved out.
I'm in the Zoom call.
Oh, now we have Emma.
No.
Hey guys, turn off your microphones. And another famous piece is Michelangelo's David. So this is also in Florence, not in the Uffizi. So this is a massively big sculpture, and you see copies of it everywhere. We even had plaster copies of it floating around Kandern recently. So it is an iconic piece, and notice David, he's standing there. This is at the time when he's fighting Goliath. He's got his sling over his back. He's got his hand holding some pebbles, and he's just sort of checking out Goliath. He is your calm Renaissance ideal here, standing there in a very relaxed contrapposto. You can look at him and say, yeah, that is impressive. If you get to see him up close, you can see how big his hand is. You look at the back of his hand. Take a look at the back of your hand right now. And if you look close enough, you can see little polygon shapes on the back of your skin. And if you look at the back of David's hand, you can see the veins. You can see those little polygon shapes on the back of his hand. You can see the wrinkles in it. It is amazing how much detail he has put in here. And it was never meant to be looked at in a situation like this. It's actually meant to be put up on one of the pedestals of the cathedral. So this is the Florence Cathedral, that Romanesque building. And this is what it would have originally looked like. It would have been far up above everyone else, and which is why Michelangelo made it so big. All right. Our other important museum we're going to talk about today is the Louvre. And hopefully you guys have been there. Junior year, you guys will get to go there. So that is something to look forward to. However, notice the people. I'm just going to offer you a tip. This is a line to get into the Louvre. It goes over here and it curls around, and they go through this ziggly thing to get down into here, and then you have a line once you get down here. Don't do this. There's a subway station over here. Go into the Louvre through the subway station and get there as soon as you, like, if you can get there in the morning, you wouldn't even have to wait in line. Yeah, don't do that. That's just silly. You're going to spend your entire day looking at the pigeons instead of looking at anything else around Paris. All right, most famous piece in the Louvre, the Mona Lisa. This will not be on your test. Been there, done that. You know all about it. But I'm going to tell you some things about it. Sfumato. This is a technique of allowing tones and covers to shade gradually into one another, producing hazy or softened outlines and hazy forms. So Leonardo da Vinci actually studied optics, and he realized that if you look at something, not the effect is what he used to keep from having borders. So especially if you look around the eyes, you didn't just do like they do in grade school where they say outline the drawing first and then color it in. It's shaded, it's hazy, which is how you actually see things. And to develop this effect, later on go back and compare this with, for example, Cimabue and Giotto. They didn't use this. This was something that was a major development in the Renaissance, that you don't need to just outline the eye. You can fade it in a much more natural setting. Now, the Mona Lisa has not always been a famous painting. In fact, it only got famous because it was stolen. Basically, this Italian nationalist said, I think that the Mona Lisa should be back in Italy. He also wanted to make a buck, and so he hid in a closet and waited until the museum reopened the next day so he wouldn't have to like check in. He was wearing a workman's outfit. he just calmly went over, picked it up off the wall, although it weighed like, it was in this massive frame, and carried it out the door, actually got another workman to help him open the door, and made off with it. At this point, the Mona Lisa wasn't even the most famous painting in this room. There were others that were much more famous. But as soon as this story got out, newspapers all over the world put pictures of the Mona Lisa. Some newspapers got it wrong, but they put pictures of the Mona Lisa and said, this painting was stolen. And so overnight, it became the most famous painting in the world. And after the Louvre reopened, after they had completed their investigation a week later, thousands of people lined up just to see the empty space on the wall where this previously totally unknown painting had been sitting. So that is why today the Mona Lisa is so famous. Previously, the most famous painting in the world was probably this one, called the Sistine Madonna by Raphael. And it is in Dresden if you get a chance. And of course, the best part of this painting is them. Story goes, don't know if this is a true story, but it's a good one, that these are actually the kids of the model who she would bring along each day, and they would just sit around bored waiting for their mom to get done modeling. And Raphael said, oh, I just got to include them in. And so those two have actually become more famous than the painting itself, and you can see them if you get to Dresden. So today, this is what you'll see if you go and check out the Mona Lisa. Yeah, it's good just to get a picture. I have a good picture. I couldn't find it. We actually went to the front and took the picture this way of everyone taking a picture of us. But if you turn around, I suggest you do this. From where this person is standing, just simply turn around, and there is the biggest painting in the Louvre. This is called The Wedding at Cana by a guy named Veronese. And this, he loved to go through and paint these massive paintings of lots of people. So this is supposedly where Jesus, here sitting here, is making the new wine, and he got in trouble for that. So I will include this video in the link. So this is actually a reference to a real painting, not by Michelangelo, but by Veronese. This was supposed to be a painting of the Last Supper. And he was actually called before the Inquisition, and they said, why in the world did you paint all these extra people? Why did you paint these Germans? Why did you paint a dwarf? Why did you paint a dog? There's a guy with a bloody nose sitting in a corner with like a handkerchief. And he basically said, well, because the Bible doesn't say there were only 12 people there, who knows? There might have been a whole bunch more. And so finally he had to change the name of it, and he just called it the Feast in the House of Levi, and the Inquisition couldn't do anything. But this was supposed to be the Last Supper, but the Pope got quite upset about it. A big thing in Renaissance art is symbolism. And if we look at this one by Raphael, you have Jesus and John the Baptist. You have Mary, whose clothes, the red represents Christ's death. The blue symbolizes the church. You have Jesus, who's a few months younger than John the Baptist, reaching over and grabbing this cross that he's holding. You have the aerial perspective. You have the sfumato effect. So Raphael is one of the masters. And this is probably his most famous painting, called The School of Athens. And this one should have a purple background. This is one you need to know. This is basically talking about, again, looking back, rebirth. This is the renaissance of classical learning. These are Socrates and Aristotle, and they are discussing philosophy. So one is holding his hand up, saying our focus needs to be vertical, dealing with the forms in nature. The other one is saying, no, our focus needs to be horizontal, holding his hand out, with relational. So come out for my art appreciation class, we'll dig more deeply into it. And these are a list of all of the people that he painted. Now they represent ones, but in reality, the pictures are of real people. For example, number 14 is Leonardo da Vinci. So this is a portrait of Leonardo da Vinci. In addition, Raphael painted a self-portrait. He actually died very young at the age of 37, unfortunately, and he painted a portrait of Michelangelo. And there we have some others. This is the room that's in. Sometimes the seniors are allowed into this room, sometimes not, but it was on all four sides, Raphael painted these massive paintings showing different virtues, wisdom, and all the way around this library, he painted these paintings. Don't have time to go into it. All right, next most important thing in the Vatican, probably the most visited. You guys very probably will get a chance to see this, is the frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, painted by Michelangelo. They're laid out in a pattern. This is the ceiling. You have creation, you have the fall, you have Noah. Then around here, you have different prophets and sibyls. A sibyl was a Greek oracle. Then you have stories from the Bible, all laid out in a pattern along here. This is what it looks like. And some of these are fairly famous. For example, the creation of Adam. He also did the walls. So continuing down, you have stories from Genesis, ancestors of Christ, prophets. You have biblical scenes from the life of Moses on one side and life of Jesus on the other side. And then you have just painted curtains. So this is what the Sistine Chapel looks like on the sides. This is a massive room filled with artwork, definitely worth a visit. Another view.
Mr. Olson,
Yep.
can I ask why one of the paintings had when you're giving a diagram, it's like in blue it said Jesus's ancestors. Like, what do they mean by that exactly?
Let's see, where was that one? That one's over here, right? Nope.
Yeah,
So this would be
right there.
people
blue.
like Boaz and Ruth, or trying to think through, Judith was one of his ancestors. You have in the Bible where it gives the genealogies, it talks about these famous people who were ancestors of Jesus, going back to
Oh, I see.
Mary and Joseph and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for clarification.
Oh yeah, so here's the ancestors of Christ along here. And you would have to get the guidebook to be able to tell it. All right, so here's the first day of creation. Notice the three-dimensionalness that he uses. How this is totally flat, but they seem to stick out. One of your most famous ones, often parodied. Here you have the temptation and the expulsion from the garden. Okay, this is a picture of Jacob and Joseph. Okay, got a good look on his face there. Now, one of the things that happened in the last, I believe it's been 10 or 15 years now, they decided to clean this. And one of the things they did is they took off all the grime that was on it, that was over the fresco. And in the process, people have said, Michelangelo didn't only work in fresco. He also came back and painted it after he did the fresco. And in the process, you guys have removed all the paint that Michelangelo put on. And one good example is if you look at this person's eyes before the cleaning, and you look at them after the cleaning. So there was a lot of dirt. This was only lit with candles for years and years. But this was, when they took all of that off, they said you actually took a lot of the things that Michelangelo intended to be there as well. Okay, same room at the end, the Last Judgment. And we'll just pick out a few of the good bits here. So this is Jesus rendering his last judgment. Here you have various saints, the things they're holding. For example, this is St. Peter holding keys, and you have them going along here. Now you'll notice that unlike a lot of other of the Michelangelo's paintings, these guys are all wearing clothes, very strategically draped clothes. Here's a self-portrait of Michelangelo. By this point, he had been working on the ceiling, he'd been working on the walls, and so this is a guy by the name of St. Bartholomew, who according to tradition was skinned alive. And so Michelangelo put his own face in the skin that St. Bartholomew is holding, because it's kind of like, yeah.
Mr. Olson,
Yep.
could we pause? It's on stream.
No, we can't. So you can come back and watch it later on. So this is St. Bartholomew. He very specifically put the mouth of hell right behind where the priest would work, so that you were always reminded that here are the sinners going down into hell. Here is the opening to hell, and every time the priest turns around, he's going to be looking right into the opening of hell as a bit of a reminder from Michelangelo that you're not exempt. Now remember I mentioned that a lot of those people are wearing clothes. When Michelangelo painted this, there weren't clothes on them. And a fellow came in and complained to the Pope, you can't have all these naked pictures in the church. And Michelangelo complained, and basically the Pope said, all right, we'll just let him, let Michelangelo finish, we can paint them later. And Michelangelo wrote this guy in. This is the one here with his donkey ears who complained about the fact that they didn't have clothes. And so he said, all right, so if you want to be concerned about having clothes, I will paint you, and there will be you can't see it so well here, but there is actually a snake biting him right here to cover everything up. All right, just a couple more. Continuing with our theme of Italian coins, this is not one that you guys need to know, but on another Italian coin is another work by Michelangelo, only this time his work as an architect. And this is the Piazza del Campidoglio, I think. And you can go there, you can walk around, you can look at delivery trucks, just to make sure that we will eventually cover all of the Italian coins in this class. All right, final thing, on a slightly different note. There's a guy named Arcimboldo, and he was also in the Renaissance, and he would paint paintings with a theme that would end up making portraits. And so this is from his Four Seasons one. This is summer, entirely made out of things that you find in the summer. This is winter. Here's spring, entirely made of flowers, and autumn. The Librarian. So this is actually a portrait of the King of Sweden. This one's made entirely out of flowers. Right, so this is called the Green Grocer. It looks like a bowl of fruit until you turn it over. And then you realize, oh yes, it's actually a grocer. Right? This is a fruit basket, which is actually a head. Okay, here is water, entirely made up of sea creatures. And earth. And fire, made of guns and cannons and stuff. This is air. And this is the end. So we will have something tomorrow with Northern Renaissance. And I had actually thought about doing an Archimboldo project, which in years past we have, but we are going to actually skip that and go right to our Northern Renaissance project. And so we will talk about that in the beginning of next week. All right, so that is all for now.